Whoa, 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 stop fighting! Today we're going to work on the end of the combat, so by that I mean we're gonna stop respawning the units as soon as they die. They are going to be dead forever. Then we're gonna stop the combat when there's just one team remaining. And finally we're going to add a user interface to display which team won the game. So let's get to it. So in Unreal, we're gonna start by killing the units. So to do that, I'm gonna start by going inside the BP unit. So in units, open BP units, to create ourselves a new utilities function that we're gonna use multiple times in this video. So new function, which I'm gonna name is alive. We're gonna ask the unit if it's still alive. And then we're gonna add also an output to tell us if it's alive or not. And here's the logic of the function, so it's super simple. We just check if the HP current of the unit is greater than 0, which means that the unit is probably alive. I renamed the output to is alive, so it makes more sense, and I've also made sure that the function is pure, just so it's simpler to call, because it's not a complicated function. Perfect, and there's actually already one place that I want to call this function, and it is inside the onSpell animation it tile. So this function is called when the animation of the spell touch the tile where the unit is, and I'm gonna go at the and where we are deciding if we want to play the death animation or the hit animation, depending if the unit is alive or not. This is the block of code that we were using to determine if the unit is alive or not, but I'm going to delete it and replace it with the new function. So if the unit is alive, not. So if the unit is not alive, we're gonna play the death animation. Otherwise, we're gonna keep playing the hit animation. Perfect. Okay, good. Now we have a nice utility function that we're gonna reuse a few times today, so that's good. But now the next step is to hide the unit once it's dead. We want to keep it dead. We don't want to respawn it once it's dead. So the first thing I'm gonna do is actually go where we are respawning the unit. So in the event graph right here at the end, this is where we are respawning the unit. So after a few seconds, here is the delay. After a few seconds, we are respawning the unit, resetting its HP points, and then updating the progress bar and everything. So that's good, and we're actually going to keep the same kind of logic but hide the unit instead of respawning it. So we're gonna create a new event right here, event underscore hide unit after a few seconds, and then I'm gonna keep the same 2 seconds delay. Why am I adding a delay? Well, it's just because I want my unit to still play its death animation until the end, and then I'm going to hide it. And then after the 2 seconds, we're just going to make sure that the unit is still dead, because it's possible that if you cast another spell that respawns the unit, or if the for some reason at the end of the turn the unit respawns by itself or things like that, we don't want to hide the unit. The unit is going to be alive. So that's why here, after 2 seconds, which is long in a game, we're just going to make sure that the unit is still dead. Are you still dead? Yes, no, yes, okay, then I'm just going to hide you. There's actually a bunch of ways we can hide the unit. We can set the visibility to false, we can make the actor hidden in game, but in this case I'm just going to take my unit and place it all the way at the other side of the world. That way it's not going to be visible because it's going to be super far, and the main reason why I'm using that instead of setting the visibility is just because right now in the code nothing changes the visibility of our units. So in the case where we will respawn the unit, for example, we will need to also make it visible again. But by just setting the actor location in the world, right now our code already handles the position of the unit properly. So that way, if we move the unit at the other side of the world and we then respawn the unit, it's going to be snapped automatically on top of the grid by the current code. So we don't have to add anything else to make sure to handle the visibility of the unit. So yeah, you can say that I'm a little bit lazy, but I think it works pretty fine. So great, now we have the new event we need to call to kill the unit instead of the event that was respawning it every time the unit was dying. So we're gonna go call this event instead of the previous one, and that event is called inside the combat system. So let's go there. I'm gonna go in my core combat and open the BP combat system, and it is called inside the function in my spell cast spell right here. So at the end of the function, if the unit is dying, so if the unit just died, we were calling the respawn after a few seconds. But instead of doing that, we're gonna call the new event instead. But before doing that, I know that inside this function, there's 2 places we are looking if the unit is alive or not. So I'm just going to replace these comparison with the new function we just created. So right here, I'm gonna check if my unit is not alive, which will mean that the unit just died, because we were checking if the unit was alive just before. And actually, we're gonna go replace it also. So here, if the unit just died, we're gonna do the logic. And before that, right here, we were looking if the unit was alive before casting the spell, so we're just going to replace all that code by the new function that we created. So if the unit is alive, we're gonna cast the spell, and then after that, if the unit died, well, we are going to kill it. So to kill it, I'm actually going to create a new function for it. So I'm going to right click on this function, just this function, and I'm going to collapse it inside another function, which I'm going to rename process unit death. So we're gonna process the death of the unit in this function, and I'm going to rename the input to unit because it's prettier. Good. Now we can go in the function to do the logic. And that's how the function is going to go. So first, we still want to keep the debug respawn if we are in the debug menu. So what I'm going to do is just add a little branch at the beginning to check if we are in combat. If we are not in combat, well, we can just respawn the unit. That's great. We were just testing the spell probably. So that's good. But then if we were in combat, in that case, we want to kill the unit. So we want to first remove the unit from the grid. So I'm going to set the grid index to -99, -99, which is going to effectively remove the unit from the grid, and then we want to hide it. So I'm going to hide the unit after a few seconds. Here we go. The unit is dead. It's removed from the grid, so it's not blocking the pathfinding anymore. And then we are going to completely hide it. Perfect. Now let's compile save and go see how it looks in the game. So here I have a warrior and a chicken, and I'm going to use the warrior to kill the chicken. So I'm going to cast a few spells on the chicken. Okay, so the chicken still has 1 HP. I'm going to end my turn and go back to the warrior to finish him. So let's take a look and see what happens when I kill the chicken. So I'm going to cast my spell to the chicken. Okay, the chicken doesn't react, and then okay, it disappeared. So the chicken was removed from the grid. Can I move on that tile? Okay, I can. So the chicken was really removed from the grid, but it never played its death animation. The chicken didn't die. It just waited 2 seconds and then was removed from the grid. That's a bit weird, and we don't want that. We want the chicken to play its death animation. That's why we were waiting for 2 seconds. So we're just gonna stop and go see why that happens. I'm gonna go in the combat system to look at it. We are setting the index of the unit right here, and that's probably the problem actually, because we are setting the index of the unit and then we're gonna tell it to wait 2 seconds and then die. But in the meantime, if we go back in the unit, so where we were playing the hit animation and the death animation, so inside the unspell animation hit tile function, which is the function that we are just right now, I'm gonna go at the beginning of the function, and right here, this is the problem. We are checking to make sure that the index we received as input, so the tile index that was just hit by a spell, is the same as the index of the unit, but we just changed it. We just removed the unit from the grid by setting its index to -99, -99. So that's why when we go back in the unit right here, both index are not equal, because we are changing the index in between the moment the spell was casted and the moment the spell hit the tile. So that's an issue. We still want to keep that comparison, because if it is an AoE spell, for example, and the spell touches the tile beside the unit, we still want the unit to make sure that it receives the right spell on its face. We don't want another spell to affect that specific unit, so we don't want to remove the comparison, sadly. But instead we have to do something to fix it somehow, and I sadly didn't find any solution that is clean enough in my opinion, but I have something that is working, and if you have a better solution, just let me know and we're gonna change that. But in this case, since I don't have a better solution, what I'm gonna do is just tell the unit to remember the index before killing it. So we're gonna tell it, okay, remember that last index, and when the spell is going to hit that tile, well, play your death animation, hit animation, or whatever animation you should play, even though the code tells you that you're not on that tile anymore. So it's just going to bypass this condition. Actually, it's just going to be a second condition on top of this one, just to make sure to still play the animation even though the unit is not on the tile anymore. Oh, and the reason why I'm not just waiting for the unit to die before setting the index is just because I don't think it's a good idea to wait before setting the data of the game. We always want the game to be always up to date. The data should always be up to date as soon as possible, but then we update the visual to match the data. And in this case, the problem is more on the visual side, so we have to add ourselves a little bit of a hack to fix it. So anyway, let's do that. I'm going to create a new variable, which is going to be an int point, and I'm going to name it index to remember for spell impact. It's pretty specific, and that's good because that's the only utility of this variable in the project. So I think that's a good thing that it's super specific. And to use it, I started by giving myself a bit of room because we want to use the false of our condition right here. So if the current index is not the same as the index we receive as input, we're gonna check if the index we receive as input is the same as the index that we remember for the spell impact. So if it is equal to the index we remember for the spell impact, we still want to play the death animation or the hit animation or things like that. So we still want to continue executing the rest of the logic. But before doing that, I'm just going to reset the variable to -999, -999. That way we're gonna use it only once. We don't want the unit to keep dying or playing its hit animation every time a new spell hit that tile, because the animation was played already once. We don't want to play it multiple times. So that's why I'm setting it to -99, -99, so it's never used. And actually I forgot, but you have to set the default value of the variable to -99, -99, otherwise it will not work. So I'm just going to make it -99, -99 by default. That way the unit is not going to receive the random spell in the face when another unit tries to hit the 0, 0 index on the grid. So yeah, make sure that the default value is -99, -99. And now we just need to go set this variable before removing the unit from the grid. So in the combat system right here, I'm going to give myself a bit of room because I want to connect it right here before setting the new index of the unit. So I'm just going to connect it like so. I'm going to take the current index of the unit, tell it to remember that specific index for the next spell that is going to hit its face, and then I'm going to remove the unit from the grid and make it disappear after 2 seconds. Perfect, now we should be able to compile save, and in the game we should see the chicken dying when it should. And they are back. I have my warrior and my chicken, and now if I try to kill the chicken, okay, it's still alive, and turn, and then I can kill the chicken, and now it plays its death animation properly and then disappear. Here we go, now that works perfect, and I can move on that tile because the chicken is not there anymore. Great. Okay, good, so now that's done, we are able to kill the unit. But what happened if I click on end turn right now? Okay, my output log is a mess. It's all red and there's a bunch of errors. And that's just because the combat system is still trying to select the chicken and ask him to move on the grid, but it's not on the grid anymore, so it breaks everything. So what we have to do is to make sure that the chicken is not selected when it's dead, and actually it's the same thing for all the unit, not only the chickens. But yeah, if I end my turns again, it's going back to the warrior, so that's good. I can move my warrior, I can play, there's no issue with that. But then if I do an end turn again, oh yeah, my log is back to red. So yeah, that's not good. We have to fix all that. I'm gonna stop, and now I'm gonna go in the combat system to make sure to not select units that are dead. So in the combat flow right here, I have my next unit function right here. This is where we were selecting the unit, so we're just going to make sure that it's not dead before selecting it. And here we're gonna have to change a bunch of things. And the first thing I'm gonna do is disconnect the end of the function, so where we were setting the new current unit and telling it to start its turn and notifying the game and everything, we're gonna move that down a little bit because we need to do a few validations to make sure that the unit is alive before selecting it. So what I'm gonna do here is create myself a new local variable that I'm gonna use to check if it is alive or not. So I'm going to right click on the current unit, promote it to a local variable, which I'm going to rename next living unit, because we want a unit that is alive and we want to check that without modifying the current unit that is selected in the game. And before setting the new current unit, we want to make sure that we found a valid unit that is alive in the game. So what I'm going to do is just move this out of the way a little bit on the right, and I'm going to add myself a little while loop right here. So while the living unit is not valid, so while we didn't find a unit that is alive in the game, we're still going to continue trying to find a unit that is alive. So we're going to execute the loop body right here, which is going to try to fetch the next living unit in the game. But when we're done with it, we're just going to complete and execute the end of the function. So we found a valid next unit that is alive, so we can set the new current unit, tell it to start its turn, and notify the rest of the game. And now for the logic inside the while loop, what do we want to do? Well, we want to continue incrementing the index until we find a living unit. So I'm just going to delete this part right here because we're not going to use that right now. But instead we're going to update the current index, the same variable that we have right here. So each iteration of the while loop, it's going to increment that variable again and again and again. That way, if we have to iterate through 200 units before finding one that is alive, it's going to continue incrementing until we reach one unit that is alive. And that's actually the next step. We have to check if the unit with the current index is alive, because if it's alive, well, we found the unit we want, so we're simply going to use it to set the next living unit. But if it's not alive, it's not going to set that variable, and then it's going to go to the next loop and the next loop and again and again and again until it finds a unit. But as soon as it finds a unit, it's going to set this variable to something that is valid, which means that it's going to complete the while loop, and then it's going to also complete the rest of the function. Perfect, so now the game should only select units that are alive, so I'm gonna go in the game and see. Okay, so it seems to work. Now, if you look on the left, we have two teams of unit. We have the team 0, which has my 3 main units, and in the team 2, we have all the beast units. We can see on the grid that only my 3 main units are visible because I killed all the other ones. They are dead. And now if I end my turn, it should skip the chicken because after the war, it's the chicken, but the chicken is dead. So it should skip its turn, and here it is. It skipped the chicken, and I don't have any errors anymore. So that's good. And then if I skip again, if I end my turn again, it should skip the slime and the bat because both of them are dead, and it seems to work. So now if I end turn again, it goes back to the beginning, skip all the dead unit, and goes back to the beginning again and again and again. So that's good. The code seems to work, but one thing that is not that nice is that we don't have any visual feedback on the turn bar that those units are dead and their turn is going to be skipped. So that's the next thing we're going to do. We're going to add some visual feedback in the turn bar, and the first thing we're going to do is import a new asset, a new icon that we're going to display on top of the unit that is dead. So I'm gonna go in my art texture UI and go import my new texture right here. So TX icon dead, here we go. So this is just a little skull that we can display on top of the unit's head, and I'm gonna go display it in the blueprint button. So the unit button in units widget button underscore unit. We're gonna add the icon right on top of the unit. And to do that, we have to first wrap an overlay around the current button so we are able to add multiple images on top of each other. So wrap with overlay on top of the image unit icon, and then I can add my new image inside it. So here it is, I have my new image. It's a normal image component with 0 of padding, centered. The texture is the new texture, so texture icon dead. The image size is 200 by 200, so a little bit smaller than the unit. And then in the tint, I've changed the opacity to 0.8. That way it's semi-transparent, so we can still see the unit through the icon. Perfect. So now we have the image on top of the unit, and we just have to toggle the visibility depending if the unit is alive or dead. And we're gonna do that in the graph. So in the graph, I'm gonna go right here at the beginning to bind ourselves to the callback we need. And actually, I'm gonna go right here after everything else, and I'm going to connect myself to the callback on unit stats change. So every time the stats of the units are going to change, we are going to update the user interface. That way, if the unit just died, we're going to update the icon on top of the button, and then we're going to connect the event to a matching event. So create a matching event, which I have just right here on unit stats change, receiving a unit as input, and then we're going to update the visibility of the image dead icon. And to select which visibility we want to use, we're going to use a select node, and we're going to connect it to the isAlive function. That way, if the unit is alive, we're going to hide the image dead icon because the unit is alive. We don't want to show the skull above the button, but if the unit is dead, we're going to make it visible right here. And then just before and finally, I'm also going to call this function right after binding myself to the callback. That way it's going to be updated as soon as the button is created in the game. Perfect. Now we should be able to compile, save, and go see how it looks. Oh, actually, the icon is visible by default when we're not linking any units to the button, so it's not good. We're gonna go back in the button, go in the designer, and make it hidden by default. So in the visibility right here, I'm going to change it from visible to hidden. Perfect. Now we should compile and see if it works in the game. Yes. Okay, so I have my 3 units on the grid, and they are all alive, and they are all alive in the unit bar on the right. If I end my turn, we can see that it works properly. Then I'm gonna take my warrior to kill the chicken, so let's kill the chicken real quick. Okay, chicken is dead, here we go. So now it's dead on the right, also in the unit bar. Perfect, so we can see that it works properly. Good, now we can stop. And we're gonna go do the next step, which is to end the combat when there's only one team alive. So let's go in the combat system to do that, and we're gonna go inside the process unit death, because that's where when a unit die, we're gonna check if there's only one team alive at the end of the function right here. So when the unit dies, we're gonna check if it is the last one. And now to figure out how many teams are still alive in the combat, we're gonna have to loop through all the teams and check if there's at least one unit alive per team. So let's start by looping through all the teams. I'm not gonna get all my unit teams. I'm going to do a keys to have access to all the team indexes and loop through them. So we're gonna loop through all the teams one by one Then I'm going to promote the array element to a local variable. So I have my new variable team index right here. So now we have the team index of the team we're looping through. And then the next step is to loop through all the units of that team to ask them if they are alive or not. So to have access to all the units that are inside the team, we're gonna get the unit teams, do a find, break the structure to have access to the set, convert the set to an array, and then we're gonna connect this array to a for each loop with break this time. Because we're going to break out of the for each loop as soon as we find a unit that is alive, because we don't need more than one unit alive per team to consider the team still alive. So let's just find the first one we find. So, okay, in the for each loop, we just have to check if the unit is alive. So, are you alive? Yes, no. And if it is alive, well, we're going to put that inside a new array, an array of index to keep track of which team indexes are still alive. So that's why right here I created myself a new array, an array of integer, which I named teams with at least one unit alive, because we need to keep track of all the teams that are still alive in the combat to decide if we have 2 teams alive, 3 teams alive, or just 1 team alive. So here we go. Now we found a unit that is still alive, which means that the team is still alive. So I'm going to add the team index inside the array. Here we go. Now the team is considered alive. And since we found 1 unit in that team alive, we don't need to search anymore. So I'm just going to break out of the for each loop because we only need 1 unit. Okay, good. So now we know that the team is alive. So what we're going to do is go back at the beginning. After this for each loop is completed, we're going to check if we want to end the combat, which will be in the case that there's only 1 team alive. So here we're going to check if there's only 1 team alive, which will mean that this team will be the winner of the combat. And now let's create a new function to finish the combat when that happens. So new function, and I named it finish combat, and I'm going to pass it 1 input, which is going to be the index of the winning team. So I named it winning team index. We're not gonna do any logic for now. We're just going to go back in the process unit det to connect it. So in the case that there's only 1 unit team alive, I'm just going to call the finish combat to end the combat, and then we're gonna feed it the team index of the winning team, which is simply getting the index 0 of the array. Here we go. So now we know which team just won the game, and we can go do the logic of the function. And actually, we're going to keep it super simple for now. We're just going to raise a flag saying that the game is about to end, and then we're just going to notify the rest of the game. So let's do that. I'm going to start by creating myself a new variable, which is going to be a boolean that I named is finishing the combat. So is finishing combat, I mean. And then we're just going to set it to true, because we're finishing the combat. So, okay, the flag is set to true. And then we're gonna create ourselves a new callback. So new event dispatcher, I named it on combat finishing, passing it the index of the winning team, because the rest of the game needs to know which team is about to win. And then we're just going to call the callback right here. So call on combat finishing, and that's it. We're not gonna do much else in this function today. And then the last thing we need to do is to reset that variable. Otherwise, if we start another combat, it's going to think that we are already finishing the combat, so that's not good. So we're just gonna go do that inside the end combat function right here. So we are setting the is in combat to false because we're not in combat anymore, but we're also going to set is finishing combat to false because we're not finishing the combat anymore. We're not in combat anymore, so that's good. And actually, while I'm thinking about it, there's another thing we have to change in the combat system, because right now, let's say we have an AoE spell, a super strong AoE spell that it can kill everything on the grid. Why not? I guess that's possible. Whatever. But what if we have that big of spell that can kill everything? Then who would win the game? If it kills everything, nobody's gonna win. So that's bad. So I think what we should do is, in the case that we are about to finish the combat because we killed almost every unit except maybe 1, in the case that there's only 1 team alive on the grid, we're just going to stop the combat right away. We're not going to apply the damage to all the units of that one last remaining team. And that's just to make sure that we always have 1 winning team in the combat. So let's go do that. I'm gonna go in the cast spell function, and right here at the end, we just noticed that the unit was dying, so we are going to kill it. We're processing the unit death. That's good. Then if during the process we realize that we have only 1 team alive on the grid, we're just going to stop applying the damage, and to do that we're just simply going to return right now. So if we are finishing the combat after processing the unit's death, we're just going to return and stop applying damage to any units on the grid. Great, now we have all the functionalities we need to display the end screen at the end of the combat. So let's go create the widget, and then we're going to display it on screen. To create the widget, I'm going to go inside the blueprint combat folder in the widget, and I'm going to create myself a new widget blueprint, which I'm going to name w_combat end screen, and open that one because we're going to add a few components in there. And this is how my widget looks, and as you can see, I kept it super simple. So here on the left, I started by replacing the canvas panel by an overlay, as I usually do. Then inside the overlay, I have a border in the middle, so I have my semi-transparent background behind my text and my button, the same way I'm doing for all my widget component in this project. Then I have a vertical box, because I want to be able to put a text and a button under the text, so that's why I have a vertical box. For the text, it's just a simple text. Right now it's white, but we're gonna change the color in the code, and we're also going to change the text that is written on it, so it displays the number, the team index that wins the game. And finally, under that, I have a button that we can click to end the combat and close this widget and go back to the normal debug menu. Good, and inside it I have just a normal text if you want to see the settings on the right. Okay, good, now I'm gonna go in the graph because we're gonna need to create two new variables to do the logic of this blueprint. So variable 1, variable 2. The first variable is of type BP player action, and I named it player action, and I've also made sure to make it instance editable and exposed on spawn. That way it's going to be easier to set when we spawn the widget in the game. And then the second variable is going to be an integer, which is going to be the winning team index, and also instance editable and exposed on spawn. And since we now receive this variable as soon as we create the widget, we can directly use it in the pre-construct to update our text. So let's do that. I'm gonna take my text component, change the text that is written on it to include the winning team index. That way now it's gonna write which team won the game, but that's not enough. We want to also change the color of the text so it's more efficient. So we're gonna change the color of the text using the get team color, using also the get team index. Here we go. Now we should be able to compile save, and if we go back in the designer, we should now see the text. Now it's updated, it's blue, and it has the right team index on it. And then if I change my team index on the parent widget, we can see that it updates both the text and the color of the text. Perfect, so now that's done. The next step is just to close this widget and end the combat when the player clicks on this button. So we're just going to implement the unclicked event here in the bottom right corner. So unclicked, and then we're gonna do the logic real quick. And that's actually super simple. We just have to call the end combat function inside the combat system. That way we're gonna tell the combat system, okay, we're done, close the combat, and we're done. Perfect, now we can save and close this widget because we're done with it. We just have to display it on screen now. So we're gonna go do that in the player action, which I don't have open anymore. So in core player BP player action right here, and we're gonna go in the event graph to hook ourselves to the new callback we just created, so the on combat finishing. So I'm gonna go at the end right here and hook myself to it. So bind event on combat finishing, and I'm going to create myself a matching function. So create a matching function, which I'm going to rename on combat finishing. Here we go. And actually for the logic of this function, it's actually going to kind of replace the on combat ended we have right now. So what I'm gonna do is go in the on combat ended and cut all those nodes just to go paste them back inside the on combat finishing. So that is going to be executed before ending the combat. So we want to deselect the action, deselect the unit, and remove the widget combat. But then after that, we're gonna spawn the new widget, which is the end screen of the combat. So we just have to create the widget just like that and feed it the player action and the winning team index. So for the player action, we just have to feed itself, and the winning team index, it's going to be the same as we receive as input. So winning team index. Here we go. Then I'm going to promote that into a variable. So promote to a variable, which is right here on the left. I named it W_combat end screen, and we're gonna use that variable later on to destroy the widget once we're done with it. So that's good. And then we just have to show the widget on the screen. So here it is. Now we have the end screen widget on the screen. Now when the player is going to click on the button to end the combat, we're going to destroy it, and that's gonna be inside the on combat ended right here. And it's as simple as removing the widget from the screen and then clearing the variable. That way we know that the widget is not on the screen anymore. And we're almost done. We just have two last little things to do before ending today's video. And the first one is in the event graph. So I'm gonna go back here, and we're gonna focus on where we were pressing on the numbers on the keyboard to select the spell we want to cast. Right here we are checking to make sure that we are in combat before trying to select a spell, which makes sense. But right now we have a second state. We have the finishing combat state. So what we're gonna do is just making sure that we're not finishing the combat also. So are we in combat? Yes. Are we not finishing the combat? Yes. Okay, now you can select the spell. Here we go. So that's good. Now we can compile, save the player action. We're done with it. And the second one is inside the W combat widget. So we're gonna go back in there. So in core combat widget, I'm gonna go in W_combat. I'm gonna go directly in the graph. And here is the little bit that I want to change, because when we are clicking on the button end combat right now, we are directly ending the combat. We're not finishing up the combat first. We're directly ending the combat combat, which is fine, it will still work, but I think it will make way more sense if we start by finishing up the combat and then ending the combat with the button that is inside the end screen of the combat. So let's just call the finish combat instead, passing it the index -1. That way we're gonna say that no team won because we surrendered or we ended the combat early or something like that, and then we could do anything we want with that information later on. But I'm not gonna do that today, we're just going to leave it to -1 for now. Perfect, now we can compile, save, and I think we're done for today. Oh, actually, while testing, Unreal told me that I still have one error to fix, so let's go fix that. I'm gonna go in my execute action right here in the action CBT cast spell, and the error says that the W combat here is invalid when we are trying to deselect the spell, and that's only happening at the end of the combat. So the last spell I'm casting, when I'm deselecting it, it fails to deselect it because the widget combat is not valid anymore, and that makes sense because when we are casting the spell, if we kill the last unit to kill, it's going to finish the combat, which is going to destroy the W combat right here. So I'm just going to add myself a little is valid right here in the middle just to make sure that my widget combat is still valid, adding a little comment to say why it is happening and why I need an is valid right here, because it's pretty important to know that the reason why we are adding an is valid is just because during the finishing combat phase, the widget combat is already destroyed at that time, so we cannot deselect the spell. Perfect, so now I'm pretty sure that we're done for the day. And that's it, so now if I kill both those units, it should end the combat. So let's see how it goes. I'm going to kill the chicken, then I'm going to end my turn to kill the bat, and here it is. Now we can see that the team 0 won the game, which is my team blue right here, my blue team, and we can see that now if I click on end combat, the combat ends and I regain access to my debug menu. Perfect, so I guess that's gonna be it for today, and I'm gonna see you in the next one. Bye bye!